Hello, welcome to today's session, number 7 of our summer semester course. I, of course, am Mr. Fowler, and I'm so happy that you were able to join me and review this Zoom video. First of all, I have to go ahead and make an excuse for myself, although I don't like to make excuses. And I don't advocate to my students that they do so either. I feel it's important when we have established a rapport and that is interrupted by circumstances that are out of my control. I just feel safer and better about your sympathies when I can show you that I'm not just making something up. So here it's about 9:35, slightly after the scheduled time for our regular class. And I'm going to quickly share the screen here for just a few moments. So here I am over here in the corner this time. I'm on the Zoom page. So I'm going to go to the employee homepage again. This is where I normally log into the class. You can see it's open. I have access. There's no problem. When I click into the course selection itself, English 103, 1L01, I receive the following message. If it pops up, that's great. I hope it does. I didn't think so. So as you can see, I'm not sure why this is doing this. It worked all day yesterday. It will probably work again today. Not in a time that is fortuitous for us for our meeting, but for some reason this does occur on occasion. I don't know why. I've contacted the school. They can't really help me. So unfortunately, I can't meet with you in a face-to-face Zoom session as I would prefer. That's just kind of the breaks. But that's okay. We can actually continue our education process online and with some interaction. And I'm going to continue to talk about the topics up for discussion for today. It's just that I'm not going to be able to contact you individually, which is a bit annoying. So hopefully that will only be one time this week. I think it happened one other time when there was a scheduled maintenance issue. But nevertheless, we're going to persevere and do the best job that we can with what we have available. So today, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about APA and MLA specifically as we get ready to start thinking about our second project, okay, the analysis. So in order to do that, we have to understand some of the basics for what constitutes the style of an APA of an MLA paper. But we're going to emphasize MLA first. Many of you are probably very familiar with this style already. Let's take a look at a sample MLA style paper in a new and updated 8th edition. All right, let me go to share again. And let's see here, MLA example. Okay. So I'm up here again in your upper right-hand corner. Hello, hello, hello. And this is a sample paper. And one of the things that you'll see for the sample paper that really lines up with what we're going to need to do and understand in order to make our papers properly formatted under MLA style is that you'll see a lot of the same requirements I've already established for our papers in each of our paper writing rubrics. So here we have the name of the student. The name of the student standing in here is E.L. Angeli. The professor's name. This is different. You don't actually have to have my name here. Instead, I've suggested that you write the name of the assignment since we have a relatively small class size. I think we're under 15 this summer. So if you want to put my name, I'm not going to mark it wrong, but the assignment name might be better. Then the class, English 103 or Composition 1, either would be fine. The official name, of course, is English 103, 1L01. And then, of course, the date that the article or essay in question was submitted. Okay, that's all specified over here in the margins of this paper, along with notes including or alluding to the fact that this is double spaced and formatted in .12 font size with a Times New Roman theme. Here in the US, we do write that as a day, month, year for the date. 12 February 2012, as the example says. Or to use today's date, 6 June 2020. Okay. Or 23, rather. I try to get it right. 23, try that again. 23 June 2020. Okay. Now the name is in the upper right hand corner with the page number. Just a number would suffice. You know, that's for our needs. But a couple of students I noticed have had some questions about this. So real quickly, I'm going to bring up a, don't worry about the quotation sandwich. I'm going to open up a new file here. So here's an example of a blank page. And the best and quickest way to get your page number up here is to hover over this little button on the paragraph tab and click that. Okay. That will allow you to select double spacing. It will allow you to select any special indentation that you might need. You won't really need this until we get to the discussion of the works cited page. Okay. And then on the upper echelon of the tabs here, you have File, Home, and Insert. Insert's the one that we want. And from the far left side, headed to the right, you should see cover page, blank page, page break, so on and so forth. So if you go down into the header and footer area, their third option after header and footer is page number. Drop that down and you'll see all sorts of options. We're mostly interested for MLA in the top of the page. And you select top of the page and the drop down box, plain number 3 appears. You can click on that and you automatically have a number, and then you can just put last name, comma, space. Now that that part's done, you take your cursor, drop it below the dotted line for the header, double click in there, and now you have a paper that's formatted with your last name and the page number, and that will automatically fill. Okay, so that's an example of how to make sure you get that page correctly formatted. Okay, so green text boxes here contain explanations of MLA style guidelines. So personal pronouns should be used at your instructor's discretion. For our next project, I have a specific portion of the essay that will be dedicated to personal pronoun usage. But it's just one area. And as we get forward and think, about the research paper, the argument, we won't be using the personal pronoun much at all. We used it a lot in the past essay, which was the narrative component for this semester, or the self-assessment essay, and that was very appropriate. It'll be less appropriate as we go on, and perhaps not used at all as you move into 104 or other additional courses beyond this one. Titles are centered, it says here, and also written in Times New Roman font. The title is not bolded, underlined, or italicized. And that's even included in your assignment description. So this is an example paper. I can upload this for you on Desire to Learn if you're interested. And it comes from the OWL at Purdue website. And they explain that the introductory paragraph should set the context for the rest of the paper and tell your readers why you're writing and why your topic is important. I think that's pretty standard. One thing I do want to pause before I move on to another subject is this description here. The thesis statement is often, but not always, the last sentence of the introduction. There is no official hard and fast rule as to where the thesis should appear. It typically does appear in the first half of the paper, although the paragraph and the sentence number or placement is not universal. But there should be a thesis, a moment where you explain what your controlling focus of the entire paper is going to be. Or if you're thinking about a specific argument, where you explain how you feel about said subject. If your paper is a longer one, you may want to write about how your paper is going to be organized in order to help your readers follow your ideas. That's not a bad idea. The longest paper that we're going to write in this particular class is just over 4 pages. I call it 5 pages, but it's not quite 5 full pages. So just over 4 pages. So I don't think you should have to worry about those needs for the papers in this particular course. And of course, again, just to reiterate, MLA does require double spacing throughout the document. Now, I'm going to skip ahead to the works cited page so we can explore some of the things that we're talking about there. For this next paper, you're only going to need to use one source to back up your claims and ideas. And we'll explain how that should be formatted according to MLA style. Okay, so this uses the endnote footnote style. And as you can see here, it includes notes. But endnotes are not works cited page entries. A lot of students will actually format their examples as an endnote format. You don't have to worry about that for these papers. Rather, if you scroll down just a little bit further in the example, you'll see what I do want you to do, which is create a works cited page. So the works cited page is a list of all the sources that you might use in your paper, or in any particular paper that you would write in another class that uses the MLA style. The MLA style page has a couple of specific points that you need to pay attention to. Number one, it begins on a new page. Don't squeeze it in even if you have the room on the final page. Go ahead and use a page break and start the next page. This titled works cited should be centered at the top. And again, it's not bolded, underlined, or italicized. No quotes go around the title. The MLA now, version 8 and forward, only requires the publisher, not the city of publication. The 8th edition also doesn't require sources to have a publication marker, such as print versus electronic. So you can see here in the first example, Allen, R.L., The American Farm Book, or Compendium of American Culture, being a practical treatise on soils, manures, draining, irrigation, grasses, grain, roots, fruits, cotton, tobacco, sugarcane, rice, and every simple staple product of the United States to the best methods of planting, cultivating, and preparation for market. Wow, that is a mouthful of a title. You just have the publisher, again, is placed, not the city, so Saxton Publications, comma, then the year, in this case, 1849. I'm going to guess that most of your sources are going to be much more current than 1849. Now, if a source does not list a publisher and you can infer who it is, place the publisher's name in the brackets. So, for example, in this second entry here by Gladys Baker, a century of service, the first 100 years of the United States Department of Agriculture, you can guess that the federal government was the publisher of that particular piece, even if it's not listed. That's a reasonable guess or expectation. Again, that's put in place in brackets because it's not necessarily stated in the publication itself, followed by a comma, followed by the year of publication. Should you encounter a source that has 3 or more authors, only the first one shown in the source is given. The rest are followed by ET space AL, which is a Latinate abbreviation simply referring to the words and others. MLA now requires URLs when available if you're using an electronic source. You can omit the http:// and just start with the www. And here's a great example of a web source. And we'll probably be wanting to use web sources in this course and in the future courses beyond this one. So you should take a few moments to think about how to format that correctly. So Historical Census Browser is the title of the web source. Now that page is part of a larger website which is referenced in italics, the University of Virginia Library, comma, from the year 2007. Then you indent, or you use one of those special indices I showed you earlier, and you create a hanging indentation where you start the web address, which is the www.mapserver.lib.virginia.edu in this case. And you finish that citation with the day you accessed the source, the day, abbreviated month, and the year, followed, and the period at the end. Now, one other thing that's not stated blatantly here, but is worth our time and attention, is that these materials are all alphabetized. So Allen, his or her last name is followed by Baker, and then after her name, you've got Clarence Danhoff, and then Albert Damari. So all of the entries are alphabetized from the top down. Okay. Now, one of the things that's key about understanding how to use sources and cite material correctly is the fact that once you get out of the humanities classes, English, history, some of the social sciences like anthropology, which is odd because anthropology kind of shares a designated field because it's also the study of the history of humanity as well as the science about the evolutionary workings of a particular group within the human family. These qualifications actually allow people to use MLA style as well as APA style. But for the sciences, specifically chemistry, any kind of paper that you might want to write about the field of mathematics or engineering, biology, psychology specifically, which is what APA stands for, American Psychological Association style. This style is also worth noting. So for those of us who are studying IT fields, who are studying nursing, who are studying any of the hard sciences, or if you just suspect you might want to major in a science-related field or medical-related field, APA may be worth your time and attention as well. So I'm going to share an APA example with you too. Oops, try that again. Share screen, APA. There it is. So here I am back in the corner again, talking to you today about APA citation. So there are a couple of things that are different right away. Number one is the title page. Now, MLA papers don't have a distinct separate title page. That's different from an APA paper. As you can see here, the title page has a very specific design. The title should summarize the paper's main idea and identify any variables under discussion, as well as the relationships between them. As in this sample paper, also from the Purdue OWL. Varying definitions of online communication and their effects on relationship research. The running head replaces your name and page number as in the MLA style. So on the title page, and only on the title page, which is really odd, you've got this format here that says running head, colon, all caps, varying definitions of online communications. It's an abbreviation, not much of an abbreviation, but it's an abbreviated version of the title, followed by the page number 1. But let me show you what happens on the other pages following. It just changes to varying definitions of online communication and the page number. You don't have to use running head. So again, when you are using a paper, and I'm going to do File, New, and I'm going to expand this for you. So when you're using a paper and you're setting it up for an MLA website, or sorry, I said the wrong thing, an APA page, what you're going to need to do is a little bit more work. So we're going to go back to the insert page. We're going to go back to the page number, and then we're going to select plain number 3, just like we did before. Here we're going to select running head, and I'm going to use caps lock example, and I'm going to space that over so that it's aligned appropriately. And you can estimate the space available between the two. Now, before I click that into existence, I want to go up here in the tab option and select different first page. And then I'm going to select, again, page number, running head. Oops, there we go. All right, now I've got it. If I click into the body here and I create a second page, notice that it doesn't, it should not have, it should only have example here from this point on. And I can space that out. And from this point on, it should allow me to create a running head that I want. Okay. So going back to that first page, notice that the title should be centered. That's still the same. And again, in a 12-point font, not bolded, not italicized, no quotation marks. Okay. After that, you have your title, and then you have the author's name and the institution that you're writing for. In this case, instead of generic state university, it would be Kishwaukee Community College. Let's see here. I think that's all clear. Okay. You don't need to include author's note for the scope and style of the papers we're going to write in English 103. So you don't have to worry about that part. The second page usually contains an abstract, which is a summary of a much longer paper. It is titled with the word abstract, and it contains about 150 to 250 words. Abbreviations and acronyms used in the paper are defined here. But most of the time, you do not need to create an abstract for a paper that it's only about 4 pages long. It would only be to practice the abstract form if your instructor asked you to do so. But I don't expect that that will be true for many papers that you'd write here at Kish. I could be wrong though, so always consult with your instructor. Also, if you are asked to write an abstract page, please note that you do not indent the abstract paragraph. Here's the actual paper itself. And you can see, again, I know this is a little bit overkill. Varying definitions of online communication, then the page number, and then the title, varying definitions of the full title of online communication and their effects of relationship research. Then we start the actual paper itself with indented paragraphs as per a typical MLA style paper. However, right away, you'll note a difference. When we use an MLA paper, and I'll show you this example real quick. Okay. So, going back to the MLA example for a bit. When you're looking at an MLA style paper, you'll see, here's a good example, an in-text citation styled in this fashion. The objectives were response to farmers' needs at the time, mainly to the need for experiments, printed distribution of new farming knowledge, and education. Isaac Newton, the first commissioner of agriculture, ensured these objectives would be realized by stressing research and education with the ultimate goal of helping farmers improve their operations. Now, how did that author glean all that information? Pretty easy answer here. They have included at the end of that passage an in-text citation, or parenthetical, literally within parentheses, citation. And in this case, it's labeled with HURT and the number 190. So if we go back to the Works Cited page and look for HURT, there we are. HURT R. Douglas, American Agriculture, A Brief History, published by Iowa State University Press in 1994. We understand that that is information gleaned from a book that could be found on page 190. That's pretty standard stuff. If we compare it, though, to what we find in APA, we get this example in the very first paragraph. Cummings, Butler, and Kraut suggest that face-to-face interactions are more effective than something like computer-mediated communication, email, for example, in creating feelings of closeness or intimacy, while other strategies suggest the opposite. They quoted a piece of information, a theory, from the authors Cummings, Butler, and Kraut. But when they use that information, as soon as they list the author's last names, Cummings, Butler, and Kraut, they drop a parenthetical citation with the year of the article that was published. So if we go to their Works Cited page, which is not called Works Cited, by the way, but which is called References, see it right here, references, not called works cited, it's called references, we get the very first example, Cummings, J period, N period, because the initials are listed with the author's last name. Butler, comma, B period, and Kraut, comma, R period. Then you list the year the piece was published, 2002, and also in parentheses, period. Then the title, not even in quotations, even though it's an article, it doesn't go into quotations. The quality of online social relationships is the title of the article, and only the first letter of the title is capitalized. Then we have communications of the AMC, and that is titled in italics because it's the name of the periodical from which the article was pulled. And that's volume 45, issue 7, and then they list the page numbers 103 to 108. So even a 5-page essay that could be used for a reference could possibly receive the whole APA treatment. All right. So those are some of the basics about both MLA and APA and how to set them up and use source materials correctly within the parameters of those individual styles. Now, I also have included an MLA works cited page example. Okay. This is simply a sample, but one of the things that's nice about this as a resource is that it breaks the sources down for a quick reference into books, simply part of a book, a journal article that you might find from a database, etc. So that's up and available for you on Desire to Learn if you want to use that as a resource. And you can find that under the tab labeled MLA and citation works resources. So you can find that information there. All right. Let me see. I won't need that anymore. I won't need that anymore. I won't need that anymore. In the meantime, I asked you to read this piece, how the sound that defined the 80s lives on in music today. Now, this is by Nick Laufer. Okay, so this is a interesting piece that I wanted to use for two reasons. One of the topics that you might want to research for this next project, the analysis, could be an 80s song or perhaps even an entire 80s album. If that's the case, great. You have an example of how to explore such a topic. You might also want to take a look at an iconic piece of 80s technology. This also meets the demands for that particular paper topic. And this would stand as a good example of how to address some thoughts and ideas. Now, I also wanted to use this paper as an example to illustrate how you can integrate sources into your paper in a seamless fashion. Oops. So any of us can just simply plop down a quotation. I think by this level, you've probably encountered either MLA or APA, perhaps both, and you've practiced using citations effectively in the formatting of those papers. But a lot of times students come to me, not often, and their students are increasingly getting better at this. So, you know, that's a feather for your individual caps. But sometimes students will just know how to format properly, but not know how to integrate a quotation into the discussion that they are having. They'll just cite information so they can check off that requirement for each individual assignment. So to do that, even though it's a little bit juvenile, I've suggested that you use what's called the quotation sandwich method. So quotation sandwich method looks like a burger, okay? That's why it's a sandwich. But it's also a nice visual way to illustrate a principle that a lot of good writers will use when incorporating information. When you're trying to find information to select, you want to begin by asking yourself, what kinds of information should I focus on for the purposes of a quotation? Well, if you answer that question by saying information that underpins your own feelings or thoughts, that's the right answer. You shouldn't just look for quotations to pad the length of a paper or to, use a quote because Mr. Fowler or another instructor arbitrarily determined that you need to have a certain amount of information. You should really get used to the idea of using quotes that back up your own assertions. So when we, as a group of writing instructors, ask you to create a paper as in a response to a topic, we actually want to hear mostly what you have to say. Even if you don't think you have something that's really valuable to say, that's all right. Just knowing where you stand and closely analyzing your feelings in writing is so important. Now, most of us don't have the ability, and I'll include myself in this category, all right? We don't have the ability to spontaneously express how we feel about complicated subjects on the fly in a way that's both meticulous, considered, and articulate. That's a really rare skill set. And that's why you see people who have those abilities going into the realm of politics, going into the realm of mass media, going into the realm of even YouTube. I would argue that the average YouTuber, once they've gotten 2 or 3 years behind themselves on their work, they become much more effective public speakers. But the average college student, the average person, probably would benefit by writing their thoughts down and analyzing them to see if there are discrepancies in their logic. So that's why we ask students to write so much and so frequently in college. And part of our job as writing instructors is to help you establish the skills that you need to make yourself understood in other academic coursework. Because not everybody's going to go on to write the great American novel or even pursue English or communications as a degree that they want to spend a lot of time in. But we all need those written skills. So when you think about how well you want to integrate a quotation, you want to think about a way to express yourself and use evidence to cement your theories, ideas, and conclusions. And the quotation sandwich is a great way to do it. So you start, of course, by introducing the quotation using a signal phrase. A signal phrase might be something along the lines of, the author argues that something else is going to be explained. So a signal phrase and a reporting verb, and I'll show you what reporting verbs look like real quickly. We have a whole list of reporting verbs, and they're simply a list of verbs that you can use when you're transitioning from one idea to another. So some reporting verbs may appear in more than one of the following groups because they can be used in several different ways. So verbs followed by that might include doubt, estimate, explain, add, claim, comment. Verbs followed by if or whether might include ask, know, remember, say, see. Verbs followed by either that or the infinitive to, like, to decide, to expect, to hope, promise that the explanation will be forthcoming, so on and so forth. All of these types of verbs are categorized as reporting verbs. Now, reporting verbs, again, are used in conjunction with these kind of opening or introductory phrases or signal phrases. So here's an example. Robin Lakoff argues that, and then the quotation itself comes into play. So after you've introduced your quote with a signal phrase or reporting verb, you can add in your quotation. Robin Lakoff argues that, quote, cultural bias was built into the language we were allowed to speak about and the ways we were spoken of, unquote, and then there's a page number. So the parenthetical citation is a little bit different than the example we saw, but it's okay because remember that a parenthetical citation is usually composed of the author's last name and the page number from the text that that author was responsible for writing. If you already list the author's last name, Lakoff, and the example in the text, you can simply conclude with the page number as the parenthetical citation. So this is another way to format a citation in your paper. So now that the quotation has been introduced and listed in the essay itself, the final step is where you explain its context and relevance to your own thoughts or ideas, as in this example. Now that you've added in your quote, you can explain why it's important. What do you think that quotation means? How does it connect with your thesis? Your explanation, by the way, should be just as long or longer than the quotation itself. So in this case, it should be at least another sentence worth of information. Okay, so let's do this. Let's use the Nick Laufer article to explore a little bit of how this material works within the context of what it is we're trying to do. So let's see. I don't need this. I need, there we go, the Nick Laufer piece. Okay, so Nick Laufer is writing about the AMS RMX-16. It was a reverb effects unit invented in 1981, and it's still in use today. If you think about the concept of sampling, which we see as an active ingredient of a lot of songs that are very prevalent today, you'll see that the RMX-16 is still being utilized, especially in genres like pop and hip hop. There is some sampling in rock music. For example, if you're a big fan of someone like, the person that pops into my mind right away is, oh, shoot, slipped my mind. Sorry. The shock rocker, what's his name? Oh, House of a Thousand Corpses guy. Rob, thank you. Rob Zombie. Somebody sent the mental vibe. Rob Zombie's work uses a lot of this. For example, there's a famous song of his called 1965, and that uses a lot of dialogue clips or sampling from a film called Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. So if you're familiar with anything around, of that nature, those kinds of grindhouse movies, he uses a lot of quotations from horror movies and grindhouse movies as sample components in his songs. So that's one example where you can see that coming into play in rock and roll music. So back to the article itself. If you've listened to pretty much any popular song from the 1980s lately, you're already well aware of what a device called Advanced Sound Systems, AMS, RMX16 can do. It is practically what defined the drum sound of the era, starting with the booming and ethereal drums of Phil Collins' piece, In the Air Tonight. That sound has been ubiquitous in pop music ever since, and for that you can thank an effect called reverb. It's the process of altering a sound to give it the illusion of coming from a larger, more reverberating or echoing space. Now, traditionally, a reverb effect was accomplished by playing music in actual spaces such as halls or caves, and later by sending audio through large metal plates or springs. But the advanced music system RMX16 was one of the first to bring this capability to the masses, using digital technology that accurately and complexly created a plethora of analog reverb processes in a single unit. Notice one of the things that our author, Nick Laufer, is doing really well here. He starts with his first couple of paragraphs. Let me see how many sentences. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he uses about 5 sentences or a standard size introductory paragraph to just describe the object that he is analyzing for the purposes of this writing. When you begin your own analysis, that's a great way to spend some time focusing on your subject for the analysis. Just the first paragraph. And he explains that the RMX16 is important because it brought the capability to the masses using digital technology. This right here, that sentence is his thesis. And he's now going to proceed to define his thesis from this point on. Built by AMS audio engineer Mark Crabtree in 1981, the RMX16 was light years ahead of its time in terms of flexibility and customization. Unlike traditional reverb, digital reverb used code feedback delay circuits to emulate physical spaces, stimulating a large series of echoes that decayed over time. While there were units before the AMS RMX16 that emulated reverb digitally, the RMX16 was the first to do so with the addition of a microprocessor. Amongst other things, this meant that the unit could store and recall up to 99 user presets, a relatively new feat from the 1980s. It provided studios with access to a plethora of different reverb sounds and configurations at the touch of a button, all painstakingly designed. Peter Gabriel was Crabtree's first customer, and these days you would be hard-pressed to find a major recording studio without at least one RMX16 amongst their gear. So he starts by identifying its importance by linking it to a specific type of criteria. The criteria is that, unlike traditional reverb, it used code feedback and delay circuits. He explains that that was important by citing Peter Gabriel as one of Crabtree's original clients. Gabriel's song Sledgehammer used an RMX16. A wealth of artists, including U2, Rihanna, and Radiohead, have all used them on very celebrated records. And there's even a digital version of the RMX16, a plugin that came out in the fall of 2015, ensuring its legacy will live on. Now we get a direct quotation from Mark Crabtree. Given that a digital product often has a normal shelf life of 6 months before it's superseded, and the RMX is still going strong and in demand 34 years later, it must have achieved the status of a true distinct standard, a unique sound that's much sought after. At the age of 12, Crabtree began learning the guitar, but soon started to immerse himself in the then nascent musical electronics industry. I inherited a large collection of old radar and radio electronics from my mother's cousin. I then built an amplifier, amongst other things, out of the bits, followed by experiments with tremolo. He went on to receive an engineering degree from Cambridge and a master's from Manchester. And while working on microprocessors for an aerospace company, inspiration struck. Another quotation. I found a component I thought I could make a solid-state tape echo from, but it was too noisy. So instead, I designed a tape phasing box. Tape phasing is when two pieces of sound recorded at tape are played at once and fall out of sync with each other, creating a warbling, psychedelic effect. He left his cushy job in aerospace to take a chance on designing audio hardware, founding Advanced Music Systems in 1976. The tape phasing box, called the DM20, was his first product. It meant that producers could now employ a tape phase effect without the cumbersome process of dealing with reels of old analog tape. After that, a studio asked for a digital delay line and funded its parts cost. From that, the DMX 1580 DDL was born, said Crabtree. The DDL was later outfitted with upgrades like a pitch changing capability and eventually loop triggering, the addition of which paved the way for modern digital sampling as we know it. It was the success of the DDL that led to the RMX-16. So that's another important criteria. Not only did it digitally encode reverb, but it created the technology for sampling, which is a big part of the musical industry today. So we have two criteria that we can sort of hang our hats on as readers. The RMX-16 came out of feedback from our customers. They loved the delay line, then loved the addition of the pitch changer module, and then wanted a reverberation card to go with the DDL. The power needed to create a good reverb wasn't available in the DDL, so I decided to set out and design a standalone system. One thing that set the RMX-16 apart from its competitors was his attention to quality and precision. During development, he could work on a setting, test it, and further calibrate it by hand to achieve the sound he wanted. A wildly laborious process. I spent a year tuning it by ear. But eventually, as time progressed, the switch over to digital studios and the expense of keeping old digital units working created the need for a plug-in version. He was first asked by the audio effects software company Universal Audio to make a plug-in version over several years. But he wasn't prepared just to have a pale imitation of the RMX-16. I was very busy running the company and knew I'd have to spend many, many months working it out on how I actually designed it. According to him, the Crabtree, the design of the AMS RMX-16 is so idiosyncratic and precise that he initially believed it would be impossible to imitate digitally. The design was basically not able to be reverse engineered, or else someone else would have done it. However, the demand for the Universal Audio piece was great, and eventually he put himself to work redesigning the unit from the ground up, this time in a digital function. The development process went through several phases, with Crabtree experimenting with several different ways to reconstruct and deconstruct the unit. The main problem he kept running into is the plug-in version was simply too huge when reconstructed and laid out linearly, so he'd have to think outside the box. Eventually, he succeeded in doing what he once deemed unthinkable. I came up with a radical scheme to where the plugin could rewrite parts of itself while it was running, which allowed me to compress the algorithm down to a more manageable size. He sent a beta version of the plugin to his son, Tim, a Canadian musician who plays under the moniker Paper Beat Scissors. Tim was born when Crabtree was writing the code for the original RMX-16, and the digital version ended up being used all over his most recent album, Go On. When pressed as to how the plugin stacks up against its beefy physical predecessor, Crabtree had no hesitation. Over a period of nearly 2 years, we exhaustively ironed out every difference between the hardware unit and the plugin. They're the same, he said. So now, in software too, the RMX-16 will continue to live. Okay, a couple of things. Number one, our author, Nick Laufer, is writing in a journalism style. So the journalistic style doesn't necessarily lend itself to formal, stodgy paragraphs, but rather kind of quick, to the point quotations and punchy wordplay. So that in and of itself makes the style a little bit different. But the important thing is that you can actually follow the thoughts and process and see how he's using the quotations in a much more meaningful way. So I'm going to bring up another example paper here that I think will help us out. Now, where did I put that? Oh, let's see here. Examples, no. Oh, goodness, I can't find it right now. Okay, well, I was going to bring up a blank version of the quotation sandwich, but that's okay. We can do that anyway. Here you go. I have a blank, but we'll just use another piece of, we'll use another example. So, new. Let me shrink this a little bit. I'll put this over here, and then I'll go back to this one. I'll shrink that a little bit. There we go. All right. No, not the sound that defined the 80s. Don't need you yet. So we've got them side by side here. So if we're thinking about how to use a good quotation, we simply have to think about how we want to begin the integration of the quote. So let's go ahead and use, I'm going to make it slightly larger for you, Times New Roman, and then we'll just say, you know, we're going to use the example. So instead of Robin Lackoff, we'll use Nick Lawfer argues that, and then we're going to go back to our document here and find an actual good quotation. Here's one that we could use, but it's kind of difficult to explain that. So I'm going to look at this quotation. You know, the RMX 16 came out of feedback from our customers. I'm going to copy that. Now, some students have asked whether or not copying and pasting is something is a habit they should get into. I'm of two minds about this. On one level, no, you shouldn't just copy and paste text in order to populate a paper. And you should certainly not just copy and paste without any consideration of how that material is being used. But the actual work, the physical process that you go through in copying and pasting, that's kind of silly in this day and age to ask that students never do that. That you, for some reason, get more out of a quotation if you were to transcribe it or type it out by hand. That's silly. Attribution is not silly. So remember that when instructors criticize copying and pasting, they criticize copying and pasting without attribution. That is something that should be avoided. but the simple action of copying and pasting to make your life easier as a technique, that's debatable. And for my money, I don't think it's a big no-no, especially for college-age students. You know what you're doing, and you should be conscientious of how you can use all of the devices available to you. Okay, back to share screen. So I copied that article, and I'm gonna, well, first of all, I'm gonna make a space, and then I'm gonna copy it to make sure that I keep the text only. And since the text is a little bit strange, I'm going to keep it Times New Roman, okay? And then I've got a capital T to deal with. So I don't want that capital T, so I'm gonna have to put a bracket in here, lowercase t, and put a bracket around the other side. This indicates to my readership that if they were to go back to the Nick Lawfer article and look for the text itself, they would find this as originally a capitalized T. All right, so then I'm going to put a comma at the end of that and close off the quotation. Now comes the tough part. I have to create the citation. Now, unlike Nick Lawfer, Crabtree said this one. So I have to note that Crabtree said this. So this is a little bit difficult. I might want to go back and say, according to author Nick Lawfer, instead of argues that, I'll say Crabtree little spelling error there. Crabtree suggested or suggests that, quote, the RMX16 came out of feedback from our customers. So now we already have Lawfer's name. We'll go back and find the page number. This is page number, there's only 4 pages. Page number 3, okay. So that's just the number 3, close the parentheses, period at the end. All right, so now we've got the quotation. So we have to explain it. So in this sentence, we will simply say, and I'll make this a little bit larger. Lawfer's selection of this quotation illustrates that the RMX16 was a somewhat collaborative project. And this is part of what made it so innovative. Now we have to go back and add 1 comma because we have the word this here, which starts, this is new subject and verb, so we need that comma to branch the ideas together. So here's a good example of how we would cite this material. Now, if we think about how to do this in the Works Cited page, there are a couple of different ways to go about that as well. All right. So we start, of course, with the author's last name, Lawfer, Nick, period. Now we have a quotation. Why a quotation? Because we know that this is an article that Nick Lawfer created. So the actual title is how the sound that defined 80s music lives on today. How the sound that defined 80s music lives on today. So then we've got the title, and the quotations go, remember, at the end of the piece after the period. So now we have to find the original source. So let's pretend that we didn't know where this was from. And if we do a quick search and we look for Nick Laufer, how the sound that defined the 80s is still in use today. We find that Nick Laufer is writing in Vice.com. Okay. So if we remember what we talked about at the beginning of the session with our citations, we know that's from the music section of Vice.com. So we put music, period, and then the Vice website. And then we include the www.vice.com, period, accessed on, and we'll give today's date, 23, sorry, on 23 June 2020, period. The last thing that we have to do is, since we need all citations for the MLA style to be broken down in a specific format, we need to go to the paragraph tab and select the hanging indentation. We need to select OK, and there it does the work for us automatically. Let's double space it too. And there you go. Now we have a real nice example of a piece of direct quotation with an appropriate works cited page citation linked below. So we've got Nick Laufer, page 3, and that transcribes to, or is parallel to Nick Laufer's article on the works cited page citation. Now, I don't think that this is going to be the solve all for every paper or for every student example, but it's good to be aware of how these ideas work within the confines of our next project. And as we begin to think about the importance of why it is that we give credit to source materials through our threaded discussions this week, I want you to keep in the back of your minds this idea that good citation work and good attention that is paid to the quality of a source and how a quotation is working in terms of the integrated ideas it offers to your thoughts and how it provides a sense of background to the ideas you're originally expressing makes for a quality citation. Then you have basically conquered the most difficult part of writing an MLA style paper. Okay, it's been quite a bit. This is Mr. Fowler signing off for today. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and have a pleasant tomorrow.